Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today, our SCION webinar with a longtime partner, Carl Mackey, Power and Ross. Today we have John Dawson, Kim Cochran, and Jeremy Little joining us to speak to you all today on some really pressing topics for 2022. A few things just before we begin. My name is Madison Garzoli, and I'm the Director of Membership and International Programs at Sonoma County Vintners. If you have any questions, comments, concerns on what's being covered today, please direct any of those into the chat. This also is going to be recorded, so we will be posting this to our YouTube channel and also sending out a recording via email so that you can share with colleagues or reference back on the material. So without further ado, I will turn it over to John to begin.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy and Kim and John together because I speak of myself in the third person. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the seminar. Jeremy, I think it's Kim's turn to give us the big introduction this time. So Kim, would you like to just say hello?
Not particularly, but I will nonetheless. Hi, we're Carl Mackey, Power and Ross. We're a business firm, one of the bigger ones around. We do all sorts of things for you. One of the things we're going to do for you today is just host a brief webinar about legal things you should be looking forward to for next year. So we have Jeremy and John. I think they're going to start out the program. They have some kind of interesting topics about employees and writing contracts and things just to be watchful for in the current climate, which is always changing. And then I'm going to finish off the program with just little bits and pieces about use permits, something other than events. We always talk about what your use permit says about events, but there's a lot of other things in there. And our job is to keep you from having a use permit violation. Of course, if you have one, you should call us, but the bigger goal is to never have one in the first place. So that's what I'm going to try to do for us later in the program. So I think the way this usually works is Jeremy starts us out. So Jeremy Little?
Indeed, I do. Again, welcome. Good morning. Thanks to everybody for attending, and a special thanks to the Sonoma County Vintners and Madison for organizing, prepping, doing all the great work behind the scenes for all of our wonderful Sonoma County Vintners, and thanks to you all who are actually here and listening to us for making great product and hopefully following all of our guidance and advice. So I'm going to start off talking of two different chunks before I pass the baton on to Mr. Dawson. One on the regulatory side, and then we'll move into sort of the business issues that we see that are pressing. And really what our goal for today is to provide you with really a laundry list as we approach year's end of what should be forefront on your mind as business owners. You are all vintners and you're all very good at creating product. Our job is not to tell you how to create your product. Our job is to help you and assist you, guide your business through the world that we exist in. So it's going to be coming at you rapid. We have 9 innings, and Kim is our closer. So again, it's a laundry list. I don't think any of us are going to get too deep into the weeds and the specifics of all of these, because there are a lot. There's a chunk that we want you all to keep again on that forefront as we move into 2022. So with that, so on the regulatory side, the first piece here is the COVID relief measures that the ABC has implemented nearly 2 years ago now. As most of you probably know, those relief measures come to an end in about 3 weeks. The reason why ABC did this initially, and so it's always good, people say, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? The ABC, like many of our government bureaucracies, for better or for worse, really emphasize public health, public safety, and public welfare. They're going to rely on those 3 pillars as far as implementing and or taking away regulations, statutes, constraints on your business. That's what they're looking at. So one of the things, again, with COVID, right, they said, okay, we need to be outside. So the outdoor piece. And the interesting thing for me as I continue to look at this and see what the ABC is doing is, and Kim is really going to dive into, well, Kim is the use permit expert here, and she may touch on this, but with everything that ABC did, right, you have to, that's wonderful, but then again, there's that underlay of what is happening at the local level. ABC says you can do that. Can Sonoma County or the town of Sonoma or the town of Healdsburg, Spassville, et cetera? Are they allowing you to do this? So again, the big pieces, there were a lot of relief measures, but there's only a couple that dealt more so with the wineries. And the big one for wineries, at least, was that free delivery. And so if you're thinking about planning for Q1, Q2, any of 2022, that free delivery piece, unless the ABC extends these COVID relief measures, free delivery will be taken away from you, because again, their belief, public health, safety, welfare is taken care of. So hopefully many of you know, and that a thing of value is sort of that term we use a lot as attorneys. The thing of value is prohibited when dealing with, as far as the sale of alcohol to consumers. So, a free gift, a free good, free delivery would be prohibited under ABC law. ABC said, hey, during COVID, you're allowed to do that. Again, that will be taken away. The expansion of your licensed premise, depending on your location, where you are, you may have expanded your premises over the last year and a half, almost 2 years. These were areas that were adjacent to your licensed premise that you had control over, whether you owned it or leased it, and you could expand your area, parking lot, nice side yard, nice side part of your vineyard, whatever it may be. You could have expanded your premises so you could have that outside tasting space, something nice for the consumers. Again, it'll be interesting to see how the ABC wants to pull that back. Our hope, of course, is once that's been let out of the bag, we can keep it. But again, something to keep your eye out on. Yeah, Kim?
Jeremy, I have a question. So
Okay.
as you go through these things that are being taken away from everybody, do you have any ideas of how we could put a little political pressure on whoever it is we have to put political pressure on to keep them? That's at the state level. So it's not the county supervisors.
Right, not the county. It's all state. So Mike McGuire, I think, represents most of us at the state level and in the Senate at least. And we probably have, I think we have 2 in the state assembly. And beyond just, write the letter writing campaigns, the emails, the phone calls to Mr. McGuire's office. And then, we have the vintners, winemakers have a great lobbying arm in Sacramento. And if you've not reached out to them yet, again, it's a simple email, phone call that can be repeated to both your local representatives, the state assembly and the state senate with McGuire, and in Sacramento, the lobbying group. And hopefully they're
one thing I've found is that sadly, it is often quantity, not quality. Mm-hmm. And if somebody misses an email, the thing is that the state senate isn't watching these regulations quite the way we all are. So they may not even know or really notice that it makes a difference. So I really would encourage those of you who have the time and ask your staff to do the same and really go for quality and quantity.
Yeah, and if you have 5, 10, 20 employees, you can really just write the 3 or 4 sentence email and send it to them, and then hopefully they just copy paste and put it in an email. That's what, again, those are the type of letter writing campaigns that really accomplish things and help. Again, if it's one email from one winery, okay, but if it's 20 emails from one winery and multiply that by all of our wineries here in Sonoma County, that can move the ticker. That can move anybody in Sacramento. So again, yep, exactly what Kim said. Encourage you to reach out. And the vintners, they have other contact information for folks. I'm sure Madison and her group can help provide that contact information after the webinar. The last real quick piece on the COVID relief measures that will be removed, but again, with restaurants opening up, this has a less and less issues. Those virtual, meet the winemaker events. So there are, again, tied house exception statutes. These are exceptions to tied house regulations, prohibitions that allow, of course, winemakers to go to a restaurant and put on a winemaker dinner. Again, falling back to that thing of value, typically that's illegal, but under these tied house exception statutes, that is allowed. And again, this was allowed in a virtual world And again, hopefully, we'll knock on wood here, we continue coming out of that COVID cloud and we can return to restaurants. So the other major regulatory piece that's been touched on before in these webinars is the responsible beverage server requirements. And I'm not going to go again. This is, as I mentioned at the outset, sort of a reminder, a good laundry list of what you need to keep on the forefront and on your radar. So RBS, right, the Responsible Beverage Server Program, requires all of you to have anybody who is a manager or a server certified by the ABC by July 1st of 2022. 6.5 months away from that. 6.5 months, you need to have your managers and servers certified. Any new employee hired after July 1, 2022 has 60 days. 60 days to be certified. So you, again, part of what our hope and desire is to remind you of those things that you need to have planning for. So that means some of you, what I've heard is about a 4-hour training course, and then you go take this test. So that means that's 4 hours that your tasting room manager, your tasting room employees, and we'll go down this little list of who falls under that server manager portion. They're not going to be on their job. They have to go take this training course for you, and then they have to go sit for this test. So that's a chunk of time and expense that you need to allocate and keep in mind as we go through the next 6.5 months. So a server is anyone that checks ID, delivers alcohol to a consumer, to one of your customers, takes an order, doesn't actually bring it back, but they take the order, and anyone who pours alcohol for a consumer.
So pretty much anybody who's working anywhere near the tasting room, right?
Exactly, 100%. Yep.
Or in the back office, who's taking calls for orders from consumers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the manager is one of these great legal terms. It's the person who oversees. Okay, what does oversee mean? So this, of course, we're going to say you have to really move to that very cautious world, because that's the world that us attorneys live in, to be as careful as possible. A manager is anybody who oversees all the other people I just referenced. So you could have a small tasting room, and it's maybe the back end of that tasting room is where the bookkeeper does his or her work. That person opens and closes the tasting room. You have an hourly employee comes in and works 4 or 6 hours a day at this tasting room. Both of them need to be certified. One would be the manager, one's the server. The other thing that they require, and it'll be interesting how they enforce it, but the manager needs to be on site all the time.
Yeah.
And that's another one of these. Well, okay, maybe in the ABC's world that this was a great idea at the outset, and this is going to help, again, public safety, welfare. But that's going to be very difficult. Of course, the person probably can leave for a half-hour lunch, things like that, and you'd be okay. But those are the other pieces to keep in mind as you plan for 2022. That manager not only needs to be certified, but needs to be on premise all the time. And so you have the servers, and we have heard this from probably all of our clients, that finding competent employees is extremely, extremely difficult. And you may have the wonderful tasting room person that you hire on Monday and they leave on Thursday. Unfortunately, you got to find time somehow to certify that person if they're going to work in your tasting room or in your winery. A very difficult program, but again, the ABC they want everybody certified by July 1, 2022. The only real exception that falls really for winery is someone who is only providing training to restaurant staff, wine bar staff. So very likely that person may be doing other things too. So that person probably should be certified anyway.
Hey, Jeremy, quick question.
Yeah.
When we talked about this before, didn't we determine that we were recommending that the winemaker be certified?
Right. Again, unless I mean, it depends on your business, but if a winemaker is going to be even doing a winemaker dinner, then yes. If the winemaker is going to come out and provide, and talk to customers and again, pour wine, then absolutely 100%. The test really covers the social impact of alcohol and also the impact of alcohol on the body. And there's a long list of things to go through there.
Hey, Jeremy, there was a question that just came online and asked that does the virtual meet the winemaker restrictions or loosening restrictions, do those apply with equal force to winemaker virtual distributor meetings?
No, there'll be two different pieces there. Last real quick on the RBS piece. Again, it said July 1, 2022, said that a few times. Hopefully that we got that one down. The renewals every 3 years, and it needs to be a 70% pass rate. So those are the two.
70% pass rate, meaning you have to score 70 out of 100 on the certification exam to pass.
70% of the questions you
don't
answer.
You don't mean that 70% of your tasting room staff can pass it,
no.
Everyone gets passed.
That'd be great. No, each individual needs to correctly answer 70% of those questions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely, happy. So moving from the regulatory to the business, and then we'll do the handoff to John. So the other main item that I see come up year in, year out is businesses, whether looking at end of year, beginning of year type of things, of where am I going from a larger sense? Where's my business going succession wise? Am I in a looking to sell? Am I looking to buy? And am I looking to pass on what I've created to the next generation of my family, if you are a family-owned business? So these succession planning discussions, of course, around the holidays, they seem to probably come up more frequently than in the middle of this summer. But I think John does, and a lot of the business transactional folks at CMPR, are asked this frequently, whether it's wherever they are in the timeline of the business. It's, hey, what can I do to prep myself, organize my business if I want to pass it on, if I'm looking to again buy or sell another one. So from our standpoint, the earlier the better to plan. If you are a family business, right, this involves those kinds of family dynamics, and it also has the legal ramifications that you need to consider. You need to cultivate a plan and really discuss that plan with all involved. If it's family, if it's shareholders, it's other members. If you have that rational, reasonable discussion when everybody's happy, now you've paved the runway for your business going forward, when and if this actually becomes something of urgency or something that you want to implement as you take steps going forward. So, again, sometimes you have a natural successor. You have that person who's coming up through the ranks that wants to be, whether it's family or other, that wants to sort of take the helm, and you can start working on that. Sometimes you don't have that at all, and you're looking at other avenues or other areas. The biggest piece that we recommend as far as a starting point is looking back at your organizational documents. You have, whether you have bylaws, operating agreement, voting agreements, shareholder agreements, membership agreements. These are all pieces that the ripple effect flows through. So whether you're at the helm and think you have all the power and control, and you may, but there are other agreements that may give voice to other folks, and decisions you make, again, have that sort of ripple domino effect through other elements of your organization and your other agreements. Biggest example there would be your loan agreements. If you have loan agreements, they typically have covenants about changes of control. So then again, those are the sometimes not there on the forefront, but again, part of this webinar is to make sure that those things are on the forefront. Things like a loan documents, loan agreements. If you have a mortgage on the vineyard, those are documents that need to be reviewed along with your organizational documents to make sure that whatever you're planning fits into your legal construct that already exists.
And also it fits into the family dynamic in terms of the flow of the business, right? You know, being lawyers based in Sonoma County, and all of us here living in Sonoma County, living here for many years, you know, I think we've had a sense of running into clients or people in the industry, either at the hardware store or the supermarket, and it's usually on a Saturday, right, when I'm at the hardware store or Pacific, you know, over in Sebastopol, where I'll bump into someone and say, hey, you know, could we talk? Could you come by the tasting room? Could you come by the winery maybe tomorrow or sometime in the next week or so? I want to talk about an idea that my father and I are having about a transition of ownership, right? And so the most important, I think Jeremy, I think one of the more important takeaways from this part of the discussion is really the idea that you as an owner of the business or a co-owner or a successor in line, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have all the numbers in terms of percentage of ownership and when and what the pricing is and how it's going to transfer, when the payout is. The most important thing is to establish a good channel of dialogue with the other family members if it's a family held business. And most of our clients, I think these days, are, you know, smaller, closely held family businesses. If you have that internal family dynamic such that you can talk about it, you can get some ideas floating, right? Then you come to your business advisors, your lawyers, you work with us, then we can dive into the weeds and flesh these ideas out, and we can go over the bank loan docs and other considerations. But the first thing that's most important, of course, is keeping that business, you know, growing and staying on a path throughout the course of the discussions, because sometimes the discussions will take 3 months, sometimes they'll take 3 years to hash out, and you can't get distracted.
Yeah, and again, we have a number of clients that are, you know, it's the 2 best friends from high school or the 4 best friends from high school created the winery. So whether it's a family dynamic or sort of that best friend dynamic, it's the same thing. It really is the same thing. So if you are in a, you know, again, closely held company where it's a small group there, a family or again, those close friends, having those conversations maybe now while sort of a downtime before it picks back up again in the spring, that just allows you to focus on the production side, making great wine, and rather dealing with these headaches, you know, as long as you have that, again, that runway paved. So it charts a great path forward. So with that, I'm going to slide over to Mr. Dawson, who's going to continue our business discussion, looking at private labels, co-branding, and some joint venture work.
No.
Mr. Dawson.
All right, thanks. Right, so I'm John Dawson. Kim, Jeremy, and I were all members of the Food and Wine group here at Carl Mackey. And so, you know, we really like you folks. We really, you're probably our favorites collectively. I'd say all 3 of us, our favorite clients are our winery and grower clients that we work with, especially those here in the county. So I want to try to help you make more money, and I want to try to help you grow your business and not just meet, but exceed your expectations for 2022 and beyond in terms of thinking outside the box as far as areas for growth and ways to grow, right? There's all kinds of standard approaches one can take. They can raise the price of their goods and sell more. They could, or sell the same but raise the price. They could sell more at the same price or sell more at a higher price, or they can cut their costs, right? That's the obvious ways. You can look for more DTC sales. We all know this, right? But what are other avenues of creative business expansion and business opportunities that aren't being tapped as thoroughly as they might? Well, I'm going to go through some of them with you now. And if you have any questions about them, feel free to give me a call, email me. You'll get our contact information. I'll be happy to expand upon some of these. I'm going to be, you know, somewhat superficial in the discussion because I don't want to get too caught up in the details here. First, let's talk about joint ventures. So a joint venture, regardless of whether that, you know, we're sticking with the traditional legal term or just the everyday person's understanding of what a joint venture is, doesn't really matter. The point is this: you know, and I know that a joint venture is a way for 2 producers to create something new, but still consistent with their track record. Sometimes this can take the form of a new jointly owned wine brand. So we'll stick with that model for a second. This past year, Pax Maley of Pax Wines and Baron Ziegler of Marine Layer, and he was previously co-founder of Banshee Wines. They started a new label called Halcone, and that label is I guess, based around the Halcone Vineyard, which was purchased this past summer. So Pax Maley is bringing to this new business, this Halcone business, and what this business can leverage is Pax's renown for making world-class Syrah wines, and then marry that with Baron's sales and marketing prowess, right, and his own reputation. They still have their own separate wineries. Pax is still making his Pax wines under his Pax label, and Baron still has his Marine Layer wines, right? But this is something they're doing together on this one project, and that's a way where, you know, it seems to really make sense. I think where you realize, okay, what is this individual strength, and what is this individual strength, and they have certain commonality and, you know, shared tastes in terms of a certain grape, a certain wine profile, right? Sort of wines inspired by the Northern Rhone, 100% Syrah wines, yada yada yada. So in that case, you know, this new joint venture, if it works and the market embraces it, fantastic. They've now done something, again, consistent with their track record. Pax is known for making great Syrah wines, and this is a great Syrah wine that they're going to be making. Baron is known for doing really neat stuff with cutting edge vineyards, and being on the cusp of cool stuff, and there it is there too, right? So it's consistent with their own individual stories. But if it doesn't work, and I hope it does, but if it won't work, they still have their ongoing businesses that they're already known for, that are in the marketplace. So in some ways, it's kind of like a healthy flyer, and you're hedging their bets for success by relying not just on themselves and their existing teams, but on the combined efforts of two different businesses, or the founders of these two different businesses, right? Alternatively, a joint venture can exist where a grower contributes the vineyard, the land, let's say, and the winery commits the production and marketing capabilities for a new wine brand that's co-owned by both parties. You can construct relationships so that the grower owns the vineyard still and is maybe leasing it to a new joint venture entity that is co-owned by the folks from the vineyard and the folks from the winery. And again, it's something that could be separate apart from the winery's existing labels, right? Maybe it's something that could also be acquired by that winery someday, this new joint venture. Let's call it this new joint venture business premised upon this vineyard and what that's being contributed there. And we do deals like this from time to time where we build in certain milestone requirement events. So for example, let's say a grape grower Kim has an amazing vineyard, and she is contributing that to a new joint venture with winery Jeremy. And so she's got the grapes and he's got the winemaking skills and the marketing and production capabilities. And so they've now created this new business called Kim Jeremy. And they're making, you know, Chardonnay. And she's just leasing, you know, the Kim vineyard to the Kim Jeremy project. But we can build in milestones that say, well, if after 4 or 5 years, they've had X amount of, you know, thousands of dollars of sales or millions of dollars of sales, that there can be a vote, you know, that would require, or no vote, that would require her to sell or transfer ownership of the vineyard to the new joint venture, right? Or if the new joint venture itself gets an offer after 3 years and certain milestones are hit as to sales numbers and so forth, or 5 years or so forth, or a third-party offer comes in even after 2 years. It's just, this is the new cool thing, Kim Jeremy wine. It's amazing. It's the best Chardonnay in the country. If the offer is over $5 million, let's say, that we could build into an agreement that Kim has to sell the vineyard to this buyer who's coming in and buying it, who's going to be buying it through, let's say, the new venture. So those are just two examples of through the joint venture context, whereby existing businesses, wineries, vineyard owners, and so forth, can maybe expand what they're currently doing, take risks, but hedge their risks by doing it together with somebody else, right? And if it doesn't work, well, guess what? They can always just go back to what they were doing solely before, right? So long as Kim's not taking all the grapes that were coming from the Kim vineyard and, instead of selling them to other wineries, right? She'd have to make sure to park some on the side to keep that revenue stream going, I guess. So that's, again, ways to think creatively in 2022 to pursue out of the box thinking and maybe create new revenue streams that make sense and are consistent with what you know how to do and do well.
And John, from a sort of, again, the legal side of this perspective, as you go through that process, I think, for at least in my mind, there's 4 major things you need to discuss with whoever you're partnering with, right? It's who's going to control, who gets to make major decisions, how those decisions are going to be made, how is anything going to be transferred, whether it's your ownership, the other partner's ownership, right? Transfer of that ownership. There's tax issues, especially if one comes in at, say, 75%, the other one comes in at 25%. 50-50, of course, is much easier. But if it's a different proportion, there's serious tax issues that you need to consider. And then the last is back to sort of transfer issues, is exit. How will you get out of this arrangement when and if anything comes up? So control, transfer, tax, exit. Those are major topics. Again, that just like with succession, you want to have those discussions before you get mad at each other, or before you celebrate.
Right.
I would never.
If I could add into that, I often do a lot of the litigation where things go wrong, and everybody joins in holding hands and being all happy, but you do have to think. It's like a prenup, I guess. You have to think down the road, even though you're madly in love, of what will happen if it's over. So I just echo Jeremy and John's comments on that.
And not to get too deep in the weeds here, I talked about the concept of milestones, right? And so sometimes milestones are ways of performance metrics that help give everyone an out, right? Hey, if I go into this knowing that if we sell, let's say 2 years from now, we have $300,000 in gross in net rev, and then in 4 years we've got 450,000 in net rev, and then 5 years from now we have 600K in net rev, right? At that point, if it seems that something has been this successful, that I might have the comfort level of knowing, hey, I now have to automatically transfer ownership in this vineyard to this new venture. But the reality is we already know what percentage I'm going to own in the new venture. We know what the cash flow this new venture is throwing off, right? And therefore you build into the quote unquote prenup in terms of the business plan, in terms of the operating agreement, in terms of a shareholders agreement, depending on what corporate form you might take. You can build in those sort of mandatory, we're in or I'm free to bail, right? The ejection buttons because of failure to hit the performance or because you've hit the performance milestones, right? So there's ways that you can do it that actually lessen the pressure, because everyone goes into it knowing, hey, if we don't hit 300K net rev by year 5, I can walk, let alone hit it by year 1, fantastic. Year 2, you're like, if we don't hit it by year 5, I, as the vineyard owner, that lease, I can terminate that lease at that point, right? So you go into it both with the what ifs, what happens when the business doesn't take off, as well as what if it does take off. So that's one approach. Another approach is—
John, I just want to keep us cognizant of the time.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Co-branding, a way to expand your brand identity. This past year, Dal Val Vineyards in Napa and Ornellaia of Tuscany partnered to create a new label called DVO, which is a Cabernet Sauvignon-based wine that they're making out of Napa. Their first vintage is the 2018 vintage, which just came out, I think, this fall, right? And so you're taking, the reputation of this great Napa winery with the reputation of this great Italian winery, and they're doing a new project together, this new label together. If it works, amazing. If it doesn't work, well, it was a cool thing to try. But again, they're hedging their bets towards success by virtue of the fact that they're leveraging not just Dal Val's reputation, but Ornellaia's as well. In the same way that Robert Mondavi and Mouton Rothschild came together for Opus One with the first commercial vintage in 1979, taking these two great houses from different continents, and trying to do a project together. Sometimes the the sum is greater than the parts. So that's what can happen with co-branding. I'll talk briefly on mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes they're not about getting bought out of the business, but about building a better team. Sometimes it makes sense to pursue a merger with another company because the people at that company, maybe they do vineyards and planting and viticultural management better than I do currently. And there's a way that we can come together where I bring my winemaking skills, my marketing skills to the table, and they bring their viticultural skills to the table. And again, the sum being greater than the parts, right? So these are things to think about in 2022. That's as far as I was going to go on the business creative thinking in 2022. Things to think about, cutting edge things. Again, you can give us a call, shoot us an email. Happy to talk about these different options. Jared, should we go into the workplace, the toxic workplace issues and what to do with it, or a quick, maybe a 5-minute thing there?
Maybe 2 or 3.
2 or 3. Okay.
Give Kim her time.
All right. So I'll keep it 2 minutes. It's 10:37 right now on my clock.
It's a really interesting issue. We could talk for an hour on it, though. John
Right.
and I talked about it yesterday.
Right. Okay. So here's the big picture, folks. For 2022, and I want everyone, if you get some time over these holidays, to go to your operating agreement, go to your shareholders agreement, go to your corporate docs, and look to see if you have what is the classic quote moral turpitude clause. Right. So I think many of us are familiar with the idea that sometimes a member of an LLC or an officer or significant, or even an employee of certain corporations, right, to the extent to which they're employees under certain setups, where they can be fired or even bought out by virtue of engaging in certain improper conduct. And very often it's gross negligence or stealing from the company, embezzlement, or engaging in fraud, or engaging in conduct that in the good faith of the majority of the board constitutes harassment, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, et cetera, et cetera. Those are sort of the obvious ones as far as quote unquote moral turpitude. I want folks to think, instead of moral turpitude, though, of a broader concept of good behavior, right? Because there are times when people do bad things or they're being accused of bad things, and maybe it's going to take 3 years for the legal process to come to some sort of conclusion in that regard. But in the meantime, your business is being boycotted, is being ostracized, and is being looked at as a model of badness. I sound like a certain former president in terms of third grade word choices there. And I'm not saying which former president. Hello, no political dinging there. But anyway, my point simply being that you got to think broader than just moral turpitude and crimes, and think about things such as the situations where there are allegations or occurrences of scandalous conduct or wrongful conduct that results in negative publicity for either that individual, or it brings that individual to public disrepute or contempt, or allegations or occurrences of such wrongful or immoral conduct of that individual resulting in a negative association with the company. In those instances, we've we've been able to rely on really, really good shareholders agreements and LLC operating agreements to cause certain triggers to be automatically met, as far as, okay, this is going on, the board meets, everyone's on the same page. Hey, this business is being boycotted by the community. We've got to get this person out of here. They don't want to go. Well, we've been able to rely on automatic buyout provisions, right? Where you go in and you have a fair market valuation metric. You have third parties identified as potential valuation people to come in and do this. And also the payout to buy them out is more manageable than otherwise. Typically it's like 10 to 20% down, and payment over 5 years at some sort of reasonable interest rate, right? Because no one goes into this hoping that, oh, we're going to have to buy this guy out, and pay them over 5 years at a time, a couple of years into a business, right? When you're looking at your bank loans, and great, now we've got to come up with more money to spend in a way that doesn't really help our business. But these are things to think about in 2022. Again, call us if you have any questions. And that was 4 minutes. Sorry, apologize.
That was pretty good. And I'm just going to add on to John a little bit. Just because that provision's in your operating documents doesn't mean you have to use it. Just means that you can. Otherwise, you're trying to kick somebody out who says, I haven't been convicted yet. And then you come back over to my side of the office and we have a big lawsuit about it. So it's a lot cheaper and safer and better and all that sort of stuff to just have it in there anyway. And we can, you know, as you probably figured out already, we all really like our jobs and we really like helping you. And we work together pretty much. We always talk to each other about things. And, you know, if you talk to one person and they say, I need to flip you over to Jeremy or John, you know, that's what we'll do. But we'll make sure that it gets taken care of.
On that note, Kim, you ready to take it away?
On that note, so let's see. I have some slides because that's just kind of the person I am. Sorry. So what I want to talk about is all the ways you can, hang on.
Yeah, if you hit
be
start,
smarter at this by now. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
One of the things I want to talk about are how to not get in trouble with the County of Sonoma Permitting and Resources Department next year. It's particularly code enforcement. The really interesting thing, well, interesting to me about code enforcement is that there's two parts to PRMD. There's the planning part where I say dreams often go to die, sorry. And then there's the building department where they're usually solvable problems. They always come up with the problem, but they're usually solvable on the building side. Planning, it's more conditional, discretionary, things like that. And of course, you got to have a planning department, or we'd all have, you know, junkyards in our neighbors' front yards, and nobody would like that either. But the goal is to sort of scoop below the radar in your business practices. So, okay, there we go. So there's just 4 things I want to talk about, and what to look for, which is the bigger issue, what to avoid, what you can and cannot do, and then how to kind of, hang on, this thing's in my way. Anyway, I can't see my own screen. So what is a use permit? It's not what you think it is. There is no document suitable for framing. It's your conditions of approval. It's the staff report. It's what happened at the Board of Zoning Adjustments, what happened at the Planning Commission if it had to go there, and sometimes things go to the Board of Supervisors as well. So it's make sure you have the final copy. 90% of the time, clients will ask me to review their use permits. And what they're giving me is the draft that came as part of the staff report. And I think that's a problem with the county. They mark those conditions as if they've already been approved, but they haven't. So make sure you have the final copy, and please make sure you have all the pages. You can't always tell. So you have the application materials. That's something that people don't realize is part of what code enforcement will be looking at. If you say in your application materials, you're only going to have 5 employees, and there's nothing else in the staff report or the conditions about employees, you still could be popped, arguably, for having more than 5 employees. So the county has this application form, which seems all short and sweet and innocent and delightful, but that's actually where you get into trouble. As Jeremy and I know, because we worked on a moderately complicated use permit, I think just last year, we spent a lot of time and energy on the application materials, the actual project statement, and made sure that there was nothing in there that we couldn't live with. And remember, they're often written a bit optimistically because you're trying to get this done on the cheap and on the easy, and there's no such thing, and it's sad to say. And if it's too optimistic and it just comes back at the end. The project statement and proposal statement is very important. There is some argument, and we can get into the weeds at that point. If you have a later design review, sometimes the things that are in design review end up affecting your use permit, even though they maybe shouldn't or don't. I'm just going to give a brief overview. I love this. I could talk for hours on use permits, but I only have 20 minutes. So in fact, I only have 15 minutes at this point. So what I'm going to talk about are things that are not event related. We've spent a lot of time in our life talking about what use permits have to say about events and agricultural promotion events. I'm going to talk about the little things you probably didn't even know were in your use permit. Employees. There's often something about what you have to tell employees or how many you could have. There's always a lot of different things about parking. Hours of operation, they can get complicated. Sadly, trash is a highly regulated area in your use permit. And I want to spend a quick minute on the events coordinator. I'm just going to give a few examples, keeping track of my time here. So here's just an example from a mitigated negative deck in 2000, where the proposal, these are all quotes. The proposal statement says there will not be any new employees with the project. Okay, right now that's become a part of your use permit. So if you add a new employee, you are arguably in violation. Now that's just in the mitigated negative deck. The chance of the county actually seeing that and noticing that may be small, but that's there nonetheless. The next one is portable toilets, and the servicing requirements of those portable toilets are in this person's use. This is a use permit from 2017, and it tells you when they have to be served and how often. This talks about amplified music or sound, whether you can have it or not. And it gets down into the minutia of whether small personal music devices can be used by employees of the winery. What's a small? Another example about employees, this is in many of them. This is just an example from a 2017 use permit. You have to instruct your employees, all of your employees, if they are digging and they find an artifact, whatever that means, right? Then they have to report it. Artifacts mean an item over 50 years of age. I don't know whether something's an old bottle cap or not an old bottle cap. So this is something that if it's in your use permit, you need to make sure your employees know about it.
Jeremy's favorite sweater? Artifact.
Right. And this is under the theme of, they got Al Capone on tax evasion, right? If the county is trying to regulate your business and they're having a hard time popping you on events or something like that, arguably they can come in and they can go after these things. Here's another example, employees, where it just says in the project description that's supplied by the applicant that 10 employees are involved in the operation. Boom, you now have 10 and only 10, not 11. I'm going to switch over to parking here. This is a little hard to read, but some of them are very detailed, which to some extent is good and to some extent is bad, but they require professional parking attendants. On the third bullet point, you must have a guest counter. I don't know if that's a machine or a person, but you have to have one. And you have to have a crossing guard. Another example in parking, it's general that it would not be on any public roadways. That's pretty good. But note the monitoring piece. They can this specifically says the use permit will be subject to modification. Usually means taking away your event if something is happening like that. Here's another example about parking. 95% capacity on the third line and a minimum of 3 by 4 foot sign. These are all things that you need to make sure your employees know about.
So
another
Kim,
example about parking.
If I just understand.
Yeah.
So these are all portions of use permits that of various wineries and other wine-related businesses in Sonoma County?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And how many different use permits are you taking from here? Just so give people.
I found 9, and
Yeah.
I used 9, but I just
Wow.
picked 9 of various ages to try to find different things.
Okay.
So here's another one about the Department of Public Transportation and Public Works gets to approve these sign placement locations. Then they're to remain covered until the Board of Supervisors does something else. Just really read those use permits and see what you have to say.
But Kim, just real quick on parking, at least in the last few years, right? The number of ADA and EV spots are, it's correlation to how many total spots you have, right? I don't know if you would
exactly. So I'm going to flip to a screen like that. In the same set of conditions are 2 arguably different parking requirements. So just because you're reading your use permit and you get to a section on parking, don't stop reading. Keep going because there might be something else. And of course, the lawyer in me says use the most restrictive of the 2, but it all depends on how risk averse you want to be. Parking also includes bicycles. So do look for that. Jeremy and I are working on a project where the bike rack placement became the touch point for much of the project. Hours of operation, some of you have that in your use permit, some of you do not. Again, if you see it in your use permit, in your project statement, your mitigated negative deck, your application materials, the staff report, all these things are the use permit. Sometimes they're very specific like this, and sometimes they're not. This talks about things that can happen during normal tasting hours, but there's no definition of normal tasting hours. So it's kind of up to you, I guess, to get a notice of violation, and then it's not. Many of them have this shall provision in them that shall be subject to review by a special events coordinator. There is no such person. There never was, and I doubt there will be, but if this is in your use permit, if the county does enact that kind of person, could be a problem. Here's another hours issue, talking about hours, things that you have to do when you can bring your portable toilets onto the site. The chance of somebody catching you if it's a little earlier is pretty darn small, but Nonetheless, it's regulated on as part of your use permit. Sometimes the hours are written like this. They just have to meet the general noise element of the Sonoma County plan. Well, the question is that the Sonoma County general plan in place when you got your use permit? Or is it the new and improved noise element of the Sonoma County general plan? Kind of complicated. We'd have to read the context to decide for sure. This is my favorite one about hours. All doors in the pump storage barn must be left open during the day and night hours, which to me means all the time. And that's to reduce the likelihood of the building being used by bats. I say close it from time to time, but that's apparently not allowed. This is, again, normal business hours. And this one particularly says on the third and fourth line, operated in accordance with the proposal statement. That's actually nice because it reminds you that that has to happen, but it has to happen nonetheless. This is one that just says, winery hours are normally 8 to 5. That's in their use permit. Normally, I guess you could have abnormal hours. That's what I would argue. On to everybody's favorite, trash. These are just bits and pieces. This has trash trucks must have a 32-foot turning radius. I'm sure when you built the winery, it did. But then when you needed room for something else, or you needed to store some equipment, it might not be 32 feet anymore. So something to look at. That's in many of them. This is the dumpster must have certain feet of overhead clearance. Again, just something else to look at. This, whether something has to drain and the outside perimeter has to be graded. Often grading gets changed over time. I like this one. Trash containers shall meet the current standards, but again, current now, current when? We don't really know. This is just descriptions of what has to be, what the trash cans have to be done and how long they can be stored. You can't get late on your trash bill, apparently. And then
Kim,
this is the event.
Just real quick on trash. It's just that air conditioned unit that you and I have had to work on. And I talking to some other folks at our civil engineering friends, you know, that nobody would be surprised in that world that if that air conditioned trash containers does not become the norm rather than the exception. It may.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think if a winery has any food service of any kind and applies for the teeny tiniest modification of their use permit, they're going to be required to have an air conditioned trash facility with screens and double doors to prevent flies or
rodents.
Yeah, it's like a gold plated trash enclosure. So just, big picture, remember your use permit is conditional. It's called a conditional use permit. It is conditional. You fail to meet any of the conditions. And I've had one client who sadly, they went before the Board of Zoning Adjustments and the Planning Commission and finally the Board of Supervisors, where we reached an agreement because the county determined they had not complied with one of their many conditions, and they held a hearing and revoked the visitation of the winery. So for years, the winery was unable to have visitation at the winery until they got this straightened out. So, everybody, that's not what we want to have happen. Most of them have, this is from 2009, but most of them have this provision in them, which is the county can come onto your property anytime without telling you to inspect to see if you're in compliance with your use permit. Check to see if this is in yours. Even if it isn't, I suspect they have the right by statute nonetheless. We always think, well, I just won't get a building permit for this because then the county won't come on, but they might anyway. Remember that this governs uses of the property, things that you think you can do because it's your own property. So buildings and the uses within those buildings. If you change the use within a building, you are arguably outside the extent of your use permit. Anything having to do with visitors coming on, where they can be, what they can do, where they can stand. I'm only talking about county regulations, of course. Don't forget, there's the federal and the state and all the other things as well. I wanted to have a slide about how to change or expand your activities, but I could talk for about 5 hours on it. It's usually an increase, right? Nobody ever comes to me and says, I'd like to do less. Will that be all right? Short answer, yes. And in Sonoma County, there is no different level. Everyone requires a full-blown new use permit application with a new environmental CEQA document. So new studies are required. And that's in some ways how the county gets their new and improved traffic studies on, for example, Dry Creek Road, right? They ask every winery that's doing a use permit for a slightly different section of Dry Creek Road, and they put it all together. That's how they get their report. I have 3 takeaways. Well, one, first of all, we really like our job and we hope that you call us and ask us questions. But the conclusion takeaway number 1, I really encourage everybody. This is a year in review that CMPR is giving you. You should treat it as a year in review for you as well. Somebody should be looking at the use permit and reading it from beginning to end and highlighting it anew. Somebody should be tasked to do that. So who's going to do that? Where will the documents be? It might take you a while to get them together. I would encourage both a hard copy somewhere and an electronic copy, and put them all in one place. Don't have one in one file and one in another file. Takeaway number 2, make sure that the employees know what's going on. For some of the things that involve all employees, like that pesky, any artifact found has to be reported, maybe even put a statement in a break room if you're a big enough winery. Have it part of new employee training, or have something in the employee handbook. You can, I'm not an employment expert, but I know that you can put in the employee handbook that you're required to review the use permit annually or something like that, at least for upper level management. I'm only talked about trash, employees, hours of operation, and parking, but there are a lot of other things in your use permit. Often you are required to do upgrades and repair to a public roadway. That will be a problem. They will shut you down if that hasn't happened in the way it needed to happen. Certain use permits also have square footage allowances. Pumice disposal, there's usually something about radon gas monitoring required for caves. And there's almost always a buffer zone somewhere in your use permit for some animal of some kind, usually bats, frogs, salamanders, or birds. So that's me. That's my many slides in a very short period of time. Again, takeaway, do take a look at that use permit every year as part of your annual review. And I'll switch it over to Jeremy and John if they have any closing statements. But thanks for listening. We really appreciate everything Vintners does and everything that you guys do to make great wine and make Sonoma County a great place to live.
Jeremy, there was Kim, that was amazing. Thank you. Jeremy, there was a question that came up. If we have a sales team that takes calls for orders, does that manager need to be on site if they don't necessarily work in the tasting room? So it's the manager of the sales team, right?
So that's right. Excellent question. It's one of those nuances that may be fact dependent when and if the ABC investigates or audits. So, if that sales team, right, again, we are still in an era where many are working remotely. So you have a remote sales rep taking orders from his or her home. Clearly a manager would not be on site. For the ABC to enforce that, to me, would be really crossing a line of infringement. Okay. If it's, again, if it's more, if we were past the pandemic and we're back at the winery and in our offices, then more likely yes.
So Jeremy, if I was called to litigate that issue or to be at the administrative hearing, I would argue that on-site means immediately available for questions. Mm-hmm. So as long as there's a manager, whoever that person is, who's immediately available for questions, that's how I would resolve that in the interim.
And as we say many times, when we're sort of at the behest of a administrative law judge or an ABC investigator, or ABC official or rep, it is sometimes how well that person's day is going as to whether we succeed or not. But we, can continue the fight. So, John, you want to take us home?
Well, I think Madison is back, and I know she's on mute right now. It's 11 o'clock, so I would say thank you to everyone for joining us in the Zoom. Again, if you have any questions, Madison will provide our contact. Just give us a call, give us an email anytime, and have a wonderful holiday season. Hope you've enjoyed it thus far, and we look forward to great things and opportunities to work with you in 2022.
Thank you. Madison?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for participating in this. There was such great information, and so thank you for presenting today, and also thanks to everyone who joined. So we'll look forward to having some more conversations in 2022.
Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year.
Bye, everybody.